My name is Tori Rolack-Smith. I am the program lead for the Includes Initiative at the National Science Foundation, and it is my pleasure to facilitate this fireside chat this afternoon. But let's begin our time together with just a little bit of history. Since 2016, many of us have grown accustomed to hearing the name NSF Includes. As Director Panchanathan mentioned this morning, Includes was one of the NSF 10 big ideas. And the idea behind Includes was to support structured, intentional, large-scale, collaborative efforts that would bring about big change to broaden participation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields at a national level. Well, we are now in our 8th year as an initiative, and we continue to see demonstrable progress toward that goal. But long before Includes began its work, many people, many National Science Foundation and other government programs, many industry initiatives and philanthropic efforts were addressing various aspects of this profound challenge to ensure that all Americans have opportunity to study, innovate, contribute, and achieve in STEM. One of those influential people stepped onto the scene of public service in 1972. Bernice Johnson was elected to the Texas State House of Representatives. Years later, the Texas Senate, and in 1993, the US Congress. For many years, she has been a force for positive change, and she has helped to broaden participation in STEM. And she is here with us this afternoon. So we have a tremendous opportunity to hear parts of her story and to learn more about her work and legacy. And it is my distinct honor, and please join me in welcoming the Honorable Bernice Johnson. So Chairwoman Johnson, it is a true pleasure to meet you. Oh, I was just going to say, and have a chance to chat by the fire, and there's our fire. Your contributions to our nation are nothing short of inspiring, and I'm really excited to learn more. So let's get right to our questions. To begin, tell us about your life before congressional service. So maybe let's start with what grade school was like for you.
Let me thank you very much, and thanks all of you for coming out, not coming to hear me, but being here today to discuss and determine many ways of our future as we proceed to try to make sure that the generations behind us can have access to what they need to know. And all of that, we don't know ourselves yet. But I was very surprised when I learned, really by one of my dearest colleagues, came up to me the day that the CHIPS bill was on the floor. And I was headed to the podium to get ready to debate it at its final passage in the House, and he said, "There's a section in here with your name in it." And I said, "What?" Now, the first thing he did was make me realize I had not read every word in that 1100 bill. And I thought, what have I missed? And I said, "What does it say?" He said, "You're headed to the podium, I'll tell you later." But it kind of struck me a little bit, and luckily all I had to do was opening remarks and then call on other people to make statements that got me kind of back on track. But thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for what you do, because let me assure you, you're some of the most important people to our future there is in this country and in the world. So thank you for being here, and thank you for doing what you do every day. I think it's so important for the future of our nation. Let me first start by saying that I'm not sure what the first, second, or third grade had to do with where I am now. If I can remember it all, I'm pretty old. But I started out in Waco, Texas, in a little urban, we called it downtown in Waco, but in Waco downtown wasn't very much. And that's Waco, Texas, that is. And unless you did Western movies of the past, you probably never heard of Waco. But that's a little town that's less than 100 miles from Dallas now. Now, back during the time when I was born, it was probably about 130 or 50 miles from Dallas. But now it's closer because of freeways and what have you. I was born into a family of, as a second child of Edward and Lily Mae Johnson, my mother and father. And which both sides had an interesting upbringing, with one side being not predominantly non-African American, but awareness of it. And that side was more educated, of course, than the other side. My mother was the youngest on her side, and my father was next to the oldest on his side. I was a second girl, which made me the underdog, because the first one got all the attention, which when I was born didn't seem to make any difference to me, but it was important to her. And it still is. But we had a typical Southern existence. There was not much unusual about it. Went to church every Sunday and all in between. Sometimes my mother sang in the choir and my father thought he ran the church, and he was a deacon. And we took advantage of what was available, and it wasn't much. It was an all African-American school that I attended. We walked past white schools to get to them, but we knew we had to go. It was essential in my family that you got an education. And so that's how it came. When I finished high school, or getting close to finishing high school, I had determined that I wanted to be a nurse. Well, Baylor University was within walking distance of where I lived in Waco, Texas, but I couldn't go there. And so my father started looking around for schools that had nationally accredited programs. I had no clue what he was even talking about at that time. I do now. But he just insisted, but I kept reading these magazines where you could get a degree in a 6-week period, or a certificate in nursing, and you could go right to work. And I kept insisting on going ahead and doing that, and I said, when I finish high school, I'd have this course finished, and I could go out and start making a living instead of you trying to send me to college. And he listened to me, but he just wouldn't be convinced. And we kept looking. So I had a physician who was an allergist, who was a Notre Dame graduate. And he said, I know of a school that's one of the best in the nation, and I'm pretty sure she'll probably do okay there. And so we started looking at that. I thought it was a waste of time because these magazines kept advertising with a nurse with a cap on her head and a white uniform that you could take this course correspondently and you could go to work in a 30 or 40-day period. So I finally talked my father into paying for that $30 course. And I zipped right through it because I was a pretty smart student. And he said, okay. I said, I got my certificate, and I could show it to him. It was in paper. And he said, I just need you to ask me one question. Just say I just hired you. You're at the hospital. You're sitting at the desk and they've just let you have a cap to put on your head. What would you do? And I just went blank. I didn't have a clue. And he said, well, I think that if you went to school and sat next to students that were after the same thing you are trying to get, you'd have a better idea when you got this certificate or something of what you do when you go to that hospital. And for the first time, I thought he made a little sense. And so we then pursued going to school, and I ended up going up to St. Mary's at the University of Notre Dame, where I rode the train. Now, some of you haven't even heard of that such thing now, except unless it's high speed or rapid rail. But it took me 48 hours to get from Waco, Texas to South Bend, Indiana. And that was quite a trip by myself. I was 16 though, so I was grown. And I finally got there. It was very different from a girl from Waco, Texas. There were hardly anybody that looked like me. But I decided that I could go home and brag about it. So I decided I'd stay. And from that we went a lot of crooks, but it led to here. But I graduated. I came back to Waco. My father was still working at the hospital. I was single and was only one service, and it was a psychiatric facility, so the rule said that two members of the same family couldn't work on the same service. So that meant I had to get another job at another facility, or my father had to. So I decided it should be me. And they offered me, I'm already in Waco, they offered me Temple, Texas, and Marlin, Texas. And some of these little towns you might have heard of and maybe not, but they still exist. They both had VA hospitals. But the other one was Dallas. And Dallas to Waco was like New York City. And so I decided I was going to Dallas. I had outgrown these other little towns. And that's where I started my nursing career, at the VA hospital in Dallas, Texas. Well, I arrived. And I weighed about 100 pounds less than what I weigh now. And I was pretty young, wasn't old enough to vote. You had to be 21 then. And they had me sitting in that lobby for 2 hours, waiting. And finally, I said, I had an 8 a.m. appointment. I got here at 7:20, and it is now 10 a.m. I'm trying to figure out what's next. And she said, well, we were waiting for this nurse. He was supposed to get here at 8:30. And I said, what was his name? Eddie Johnson. I said, he is standing right here. Well, they were shocked because you could see it with the flush going up in their faces that I was not a white male, because the papers didn't say that. And so they were really put into a very frenzied position, because not only was I not a male, I was black, which had never happened at that facility before. And so you can imagine that we had some very striking, interesting, and survivable days. But I stayed because the chief nurse said, you gotta do this. It's gotta happen at some time. And so I stayed there. And I'm not gonna continue talking about that because I made it.
let's talk about the students. So we have students in the audience today, and you've just reflected on your experience as a student. What advice would you offer to the students in the audience today who are persisting through, unfortunately, sometimes similar situations today as they go about their academic pursuits?
Well, let me just say this. I'm from a mixed family. I have lived with racial prejudice all of my life, but it has not made my life miserable. Because you make your own life. You determine what's possible to make you happy, and that's what you pursue. You're never going to change other people that much. And they're really not going to change you that much, because if you're determined, you're going to be you, and they're going to be them. But you can learn to respect each other. And so I have been able to do okay, knowing who I am, knowing what I feel are my responsibilities of sharing and making opportunities. I want to make sure that every child has an opportunity to feel their potential, not just for that child, but for the world.
Maybe you could tell us more about your work in Congress and some of the things that you did to make STEM more diverse, because all of our audience here is in some way working toward that goal.
Well, thank you. I think that is our future as a nation. I was able to see firsthand how things changed so quickly once that semiconductor was developed, and how it has come to dominate the world, and how not only in what its capability is now, but what we perceive might become the coming capability. And security is one of the major things, but we've got to have minds that are going to be sharp enough to be able to help determine all of that, because none of this happens by itself. It all happens with human intervention, and we all have got to be ready. We don't have enough minds to assume that we can let a lot of minds go and not worry about it, because we don't know where that talent might be. Just think about that light bulb that Edison could never get it to stay on until a black man found a way, and they came together. And that black man doesn't get credit, but I do a little black history too. But once they got together, they got a light bulb that stays on. And so you cannot write a mind off. You never really know where that next light bulb might be. And you read the history of how we came along and each one step right after another, you cannot overlook that it was not anybody other than the people on the scene looking for better ways and trying to make it a little easier for them that was able to get it done. They might have to go through somebody white, but they did it. And when real history is written, you begin to see how that was done. And so that's why it's important to me that people that have experiences that might be different from the norm can come up with ideas that when you don't have to worry about that, you never think about it. But if you're in a position where you have to figure out exactly how you're going to do it, you're going to find some creativity.
Based on your incredible background, your illustrious career, and all of your personal and professional experiences with broadening participation, what more? You've given us excellent advice, but what more do you think the nation can do to inspire, and cultivate and support students from under-resourced schools in rural and urban America to pursue STEM careers?
Well, you have to understand this is coming from me. It's not scientific, and it's not been, well, it could be challenged, but it hadn't been tried everywhere. But let me just say this. I think one of our largest challenges is altering our education system for more inclusiveness and for change. We cannot teach the same thing we taught 50 years ago and think it's going to have results we need today. And that doesn't mean basics. Now, you know, you're going to use the same proper English as you did 25, 40, 50, 100 years ago. How you congregate a verb and all that stuff. So I'm not talking about that. But various techniques and opportunities for young people to explore more of their thinking. I'm not sure. I'm not an educator, but I'm not sure that we're doing enough of that in our schools to encourage more creative thinking. I'm not sure that we've allowed our curricula to advance itself, to encourage more thinking, more creative thinking. When I see us giving some of the same degrees over and over and over again when kids can't find a job, I have to believe that it's time to rethink that degree. Now, I might be wrong because I'm not an educator, but you are. You're educators because you're still in the workforce and the thinking community. We've got to do something about making sure that the skills that we are promoting are going to be useful. The degrees that we're getting conferred are going to be useful because things have changed, whether we've looked up and found out about it or not. I see schools grasping for almost whatever they can get to teach. I'm not sure how healthy that is. But they got to have so many teachers for so many students, so whatever they can find, that's what they're trying to find. And right now, you see the scramble in my city of Dallas, where almost anybody with any kind of degree get a job teaching. When I see that, I wonder whether or not we are walking together as we look forward to addressing our entire education system, or looking ahead to see what skills we need to be encouraging and promoting. Because let me assure you, whatever skills we need, they're available among the young students that we are trying to get to go in certain directions, if we can help them get there. People are no different than they were when I came along. They rise to the occasion, but you gotta have leadership to get them there. And so I want all of us to think about whether or not we need to look deeper into our educational systems to see if we are guiding our thinking patterns and stimulating that thinking to be a little bit more creative than what we were in the past. We know how to congregate a verb now. We know how to put sentences together. We don't even use full sentences like we did when I came along. Everybody's got a computer that had never been heard of. When I came along, the first TV he had was as big as this notebook. Now, the whole thing was as big as that screen up there. But what you had to look at was about this size. Now you can get a screen and go all the way across this room and never have to touch it. Have we come that far? And determining what we need to be doing to make sure that our future generations are getting the right stimulation. That is one of my concerns, and I'm almost 90 years old. We can't ever stop in researching and guiding and encouraging creativity, because if we do, the world is not going to stop with us. And so I would encourage young people to think big. I don't know if you have to think big. Think. Just make sure you think and use your imagination and determine that, yes, things can be possible. Just think about how much influence one mind can have that change the entire world.
When you put a lot of work into a meeting like this, sometimes you're happy when the day ends. This is the antithesis of that feeling. I am sorry that this session has to end. I have so enjoyed hearing about your story and the inspiring words that I know will motivate all of us in the work that we're doing. I want to thank you for being here. On behalf of the National Science Foundation, thank you for your support through the years. I do not want you to leave, however, without this gift that we have prepared for you. And if the team in the back could cue that next slide. So what we have for you is, first, a booklet that is just highlighting some of the progress that we've made in this initiative that now bears your name. And for those of you who are in the audience, if you just scan that QR code, that'll take you directly to that highlights booklet that we've talked some about throughout the week. That will give you a chance to see some of the early progress that we're making as an initiative, and we wanted to share that with you first. So we made sure you got it before we shared it with everyone else in the room.
Oh, thank you.
And then we've also provided for you, inside the box, there's a book, and we're calling it Notes from the National Network. And so various individuals that you see in the crowd today have written notes to you about the impact of the work and the way that you have inspired them and inspired change. So thank you again very much.
Well, thanks to all of you.